So far, our molecule of oxygen has made its way through the respiratory system into the blood, and we know that the blood is being transported in the blood vessels. The heart's role is to pump that blood through the blood vessels around the body. We're going to follow our molecule of oxygen from the lungs to the heart and down to a muscle. Then follow a molecule of carbon dioxide from a muscle back to the heart and to the lungs to be expired. Let's start with the heart. For simplicity, we'll just imagine a traditional heart shape, but it's important to know that this is perhaps a more realistic diagram, and in real life it's again a lot more complicated. The first thing we can do when looking at the structure of the heart is to divide it into 4 chambers. The upper chambers are known as the atria, plural, or the atrium, singular. You can remember the atrium of the top chambers because a capital A points upwards. The bottom 2 chambers are called ventricles, and conveniently the V of ventricles points downwards. In a healthy heart, blood should only travel from an atrium to a ventricle. Blood should never move from a ventricle to a ventricle. This can happen and is commonly known as having a hole in the heart. This means the blood that is being pumped around the body that should be oxygenated is mixing with deoxygenated blood that has just returned to the heart. This makes it more difficult to ensure the tissues of the body receive the oxygen they need. It's also important to note here that the structures of the body are usually presented in the anatomical position. So as you're looking at the screen, this is their left and this is their right. So far we have a left atrium and a left ventricle, and a right atrium and a right ventricle. Back to our oxygenated blood at the lungs. The blood will firstly make its way to and enter the left atrium. On the contraction of the atrium, the blood will be squeezed down into the left ventricle. Between the 2 chambers is a valve that only opens one way. This is one of 2 atrioventricular valves, and this one is called the mitral valve. It opens as the pressure increases during the contraction of the atrium, then closes off once the blood is inside the ventricle. The next step is the contraction of the ventricles. The left ventricle, where the blood with our molecule of oxygen currently is, has thicker and stronger muscular walls because it needs to pump the blood under high pressure around the body. On the contraction, the blood leaves the heart on its journey around the body. As we know, the blood travels away from the heart in arteries. These branch into arterioles and eventually capillaries. Oxygen diffuses into the tissues, in this case a muscle, and carbon dioxide diffuses from the muscle into the blood. The deoxygenated blood is carried away from the capillaries that become venules, then larger veins before eventually returning to the heart. On the return journey, the now deoxygenated blood enters the heart via the right atrium. Again, the atria contract, forcing the blood into the right ventricle. Much like the left side, there is a valve preventing backflow. This valve is called the tricuspid valve because it has 3 sides. When the ventricles contract, the blood is forced out of the heart up to the lungs. Diffusion takes place. We drop off the CO2 and pick up the oxygen ready for another cycle. So far, we know the names of the 4 chambers of the heart, 2 valves, and we understand the route blood takes around the body. We just need to add the names of the blood vessels involved and 2 more valves. This should also serve as a bit of a recap. The first step of the journey was from the lungs to the heart. We were on the way into the heart, so the vessel must be a vein. This vein was leaving the lungs, so is said to be the pulmonary vein. Pulmonary is Latin for lungs, so anything lung related is often said to be pulmonary. Next, we entered the left atrium and then the left ventricle. On the pump of the left ventricle, blood leaves the heart via the main artery, called the aorta. Between the heart and the aorta is the aortic valve. Again, this valve prevents the backflow of blood into the heart. The blood travels around the body, delivers its oxygen, picks up the carbon dioxide. Now this needs to be taken back to the heart. The vein that delivers the blood back to the heart is called the vena cava. The superior vena cava delivers the blood from the head and chest, while the inferior vena cava delivers the blood back to the heart from the lower body. The blood enters the right atrium, is forced into the right ventricle, then is pumped to the lungs in our final blood vessel. The blood is leaving the heart, so the vessel must be an artery. It's heading to the lungs, so we have the pulmonary artery. This also brings us to the final valve we need to know, which separates the right ventricle from the pulmonary artery. This is called the pulmonary valve. Both the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve are sometimes referred to as semilunar valves because of their half-moon-like shape. The final two terms to add on refer to this almost figure-of-8 system where the blood is pumped to the lungs or the rest of the body. The flow of blood from the heart to the lungs and back is known as pulmonary circulation, while the flow of blood from the heart to the tissues of the body and back is systemic circulation.